So welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast. This is where we explore the new game-changing understanding that can unlock new levels of performance, resourcefulness, and well-being in the workplace. Join us if you want to be part of the new breed of leaders in business. Join us if you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber. And join us if you want to be part of the new revolution in understanding how the mind works and recognize that we are more than just our psychology and that can lead to better results.
Hello and welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast series. And today I've got another lovely conversation lined up, this time with actually an old client of mine, Nigel Wilson. And we're going to be talking all about tech, change, psychological safety, and quality of mind. So Nigel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Piers. It's great to be on. And looking forward to the conversation today and unpacking some of those interesting topics. Myself, having worked in tech for a number of years, I think, and then having worked with you on a personal basis on quality of mind, fascinating now how I think those two things come together in a very important way that I'm hoping to harness to help more organizations get greater value from business change and tech change.
Well, that's the fascinating thing of how the two worlds are slightly met. And because you want to be helping organizations to deliver tech in a way that is much more taking into consideration the human factor. Before we get into that, can you give listeners just a minute or two about your background so they've got a little bit of context about where you're coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always worked in tech and professional services and software consultancy, building complex, bespoke systems for clients. And in doing so, having to put together, teams that have to perform in often quite difficult environments in terms of getting complex projects and programs delivered into organizations. And starting out myself, hands-on technically as a coder, and then moving into project and program management, and then leading software consultancy businesses. It's been fascinating how the industry has evolved and just how now actually something like quality of mind probably is the interesting thing to be exploring and talking about. People currently in the industry are talking about this under the guise of psychological safety, because there's such a shortage of great tech talent at the minute. There's so much demand for organizations to renew, reinvent, transform using technology that from my perspective, how do you deliver this better? How do you get more out of your spend on ever scarce tech talent? And, for many years, I worked in the agile space and looking at agile methods, but of course that's very much about organizing work and technology tasks rather than organizing the people, understanding their emotions, their feelings, and how they work together as a high-performing team. And I think really it was the work that Google did under their project Aristotle in around 2015 that sort of brought this to the table in terms of tech organizations thinking about a little bit more about the human factors and how people work together as teams, how organizations adapt to change. That's really sort of created this conversation. And you see now increasingly a number of books, studies, tools coming to the fore in the tech industry because people are realizing this is the lever to pull really in terms of getting greater performance out of tech delivery.
Okay. So there's lots in what you just said that I want to unpack actually. So So what is it would you say from all your experience of, being a coder, doing agile and running tech businesses as a consultant and helping clients do digital transformation, etc. What would you say is missing that you see that you think is so crucial to help change happen quicker, faster, easier?
I think often there isn't a recognition of the true power or potential, I think, in some of this understanding. People perhaps assuming that certain environmental conditions are hardwired to trigger certain behaviors and responses.
Mm-hmm.
And teams perhaps feeling unable to have maybe the kind of courageous conversations that they might like to have with each other or key stakeholders in the organization.
So you listen to something like agile, and if you were to read about it, if you were doing traditional change management or project management and you read about agile, you go, oh, that's great. That looks much better than some of the other ways of doing it. It looks quicker. It looks more nimble. It looks like a more effective way to do it. But you were mentioning this before we press record about actually there's still some elements of that that's missing. So it might be called agile and there's a lovely methodology there, but is it still missing some of the human aspect of it then, even in the agile methodology approach?
Yeah, I believe so. And that was probably never the intention when the Agile Manifesto was developed 20 years ago. It talks about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Yet in my experience, I think as an industry, we've all too often fallen into the trap of, we want to get better at delivering tech. We need to get better at agile and start thinking about getting better at applying a process. And, there's a growing industry around agile coaching, which to me seems to be a little bit more erring often towards the side of agile training, getting people more effective at adopting a methodology rather than actually more effective at adopting a mindset and really truly understand what's going on within an organization, how that organization can embed change that's delivered through technology, and how teams can work effectively together and with each other to be more productive.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, isn't it? Because I see that in lots of ways. That turns out that organizations, they tend to lean towards processes and structures and things rather than to the person, the human element,
Yeah.
partly because they don't understand. I mean, innocently, invisibly, don't understand the mind in the way that would help them do that. So they lean to what they can do, which is process and that kind of training. But you also mentioned something earlier in your intro about the work around psychological safety that came out of Google's Project Aristotle, sort of eight years ago, where they found out that, because if there's someone that does digital and tech, it's Google, right? So they're a bit of an authority on this. And they found out that the teams that work best were the ones that had this thing they called psychological safety. And there was a few components of psychological safety that really made a difference. And that increased the benefit of, the sort of benefit realization of those projects and the speed and happier people as well.
Yeah.
So all great stuff. And that's led to the sort of desire for organizations to have psychological safety. And as regular listeners might know, they've listened to some of our other podcasts, Quality of Mind has a particular view on how to deliver psychological safety. But I'd love to hear that from you, what you see as crucial to getting what Google was pointing to. What do you think is crucial in that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Piers. And I think for me, a greater understanding of quality of mind is interesting. And probably for the audience who aren't familiar with quality of mind, that would take a little bit of a while to unpack. But I think, if you look at us as human beings, we take data and that forms certain beliefs quite often. And that in our psychology creates potentially certain responses. So, people will form an association perhaps between if a deadline's missed and there's an annoyed client or boss, there could be consequences to that in terms of a project or your individual standing within the organization. And, the thinking around psychological safety is that sometimes certain behaviors in the workplace, certain cultures in the workplace could, if you like, damage your psychological safety. And I think the interesting thing for me through the understanding of quality of mind is actually, yes, there could be potential consequences to particular situations. And, our brains are hardwired for safety and to protect us from, when we lived out in the wild and we're going to be attacked by a wild animal, there's a response triggered deeply in the brain to keep you safe and keep you alive. Unfortunately, often those things get sometimes triggered at work as well. If you think you're under threat and, angry client, angry boss, that's not a good place to be. That puts you potentially into some kind of defensive mechanism. But I think the interesting thing then is kind of put that into quality of mind. It's like, well, actually, we know that the system will reset itself. There is an always on tap, infinite kind of potential resource available to us, when we're open to receiving that. So on the one hand, as humans, we take in data, we program to process it, and we create a particular response. We feel threatened, perhaps, in a particular scenario. But also we know from quality of mind work that actually really no one can create any permanent damage to your psychological safety, and the system has the ability to reset itself.
Yeah, I think that's nicely put, because I think the way I would look at it is that, yes, in the game of business, if there's consequences if your project is late or whatever, of course there is. You know, you might have a client who's missed their deadlines and unhappy. So there's a consequence. But the fact that that can do anything to take away our well-being, sense of, fulfillment or joy or peace of mind is a misnomer. But if the system is in what we would call low aperture, or what you might call psychological alertness, or the vagal nerves triggered, depending on
Mm.
which language you want to use, then it will look and feel like that.
Yeah.
It will, and some organizations, the way they are run, accidentally trigger people into that fight or flight, to use what you were saying earlier, that psychological alertness, and people then start to contract down, and then they're not feeling psychologically safe. They don't then tell their colleagues or their clients when the mistakes happen, because they're like, oh my God, I can't, I need to fix this. What's happening? So
Yeah.
people don't express themselves. People feel on edge. They're walking on eggshells, and the vicious circle continues. Now, what we're pointing to equality of mind is, if you know what we truly are is not at risk, it's ring fence. Whatever goes on in the game of life, whatever occurs on the screen of perception, cannot be damaged by a project being late, or an angry client, or an angry boss. There's going to be consequences in the game of life, but it doesn't damage you. It can't get you, right? And our psychology, and this is one of the funniest things I think about psychological safety in a way, because it is a misnomer, because our psychology by definition is not stable,
Mm.
right? It's like the weather. It changes from cloudy to sunny to rainy to whatever. So now there is something that we are before that is stable.
Yes.
Right. But it's not what appears on the screen of perception in our psychology. So trying to get our psychology to be stable and never get triggered because of its learned conditioning, it's just not a thing to do. I mean, it's just like, no one minds when a 2-year-old has a tantrum. They
Mm.
go, well, that's fine. That's not who they are. As a 2-year-old, we don't think the tantruming 2-year-old is the 2-year-old. We just go, well, that's what 2-year-olds do. Right. So, but I think we take ourselves far more seriously as adults, and think, well, if I have a bad day because of this, that's who I am. And then that sort of seeps into our psyche, and then all the vicious circle continues. But if we see that the psychological alertness triggers, that when they come, are just telling us we're in the wrong aperture, and we don't need to then do anything about that, because it will self-correct. Off we go. And I think that's the misnomer. I think that, so it's not about saying, oh yes, there aren't going to be things that go wrong in businesses. Of course there are. But it's when you recognize what they are, they don't really bother you. And you can quickly get back into that higher aperture, that higher quality of mind, which will give you more resourcefulness and resilience to deal with it. And I think the work that Professor Amy Edmondson from Harvard did, she defined it really neatly, what was behind psychological safety. And she says it's about humility, curiosity, and empathy amongst colleagues and teammates, things like that, and stakeholders. So if you think about it, humility, curiosity, and empathy, you could go, well, great, how do I have some more of those? Now, I'm going to suggest, and I'd love to hear your view, is from your understanding of quality of mind and the work we've done, how do you now see humility, curiosity, and empathy, and your ability to have those attributes?
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? Through the understanding we've talked about, those things are there when the aperture's open and allows it to flow. We talked about flow states. That's what, this a lot of this work points to, is actually when people are in flow and when teams are working openly and effectively together, you get better results as a business. And I think most people recognize, actually, you have times when you're in flow, you're highly productive. A lot of the kind of stuff we talked about, those kind of nagging things in the psychology, that's like, oh, I feel threatened, or am I good enough to do this, or whatever. Those kind of self things in the software, as I call it, in the psychology, are often disappear, and the sort of the hardware just sort of takes over, and those things flow. So I think, yeah.
Well, that's an interesting metaphor, actually. Let's use the tech metaphor, given we're talking about tech. So, and I might get this wrong, so you have this, Nigel, but would it be fair to say that things like the humility, curiosity, empathy, flow are in our very innate firmware, as opposed
Yes.
to our software. Is
Yes.
that an accurate metaphor?
Yeah. And that is exactly the metaphor. And, you know, when we've talked about what's behind the self and the psychology and having a constant source of resource and potential, then absolutely that's in the firmware, and it's built into the firmware in a way that, you know, can't be damaged through any of this psychological safety, and is accessible when there aren't things going on the user interface or in the software that are preventing you from accessing that.
Yes. And sometimes we have to, you know, you've got to do a control alt delete to reset, to go back to firmware.
Close down the app and restart it.
Exactly. And I guess what we're talking about is that if we understood that more, we wouldn't get so caught out by the glitches in the software or whatever. You know, we have more available, and more of the raw power of what we are is available to deal with whatever we need to deal with. So
absolutely. And I think the fascinating thing to this understanding and the conversation on psychological safety in tech is then what's our response to that, given that understanding. And, you know, traditional sort of organizational thinking is, if you want to, you know, look after your people and improve human performance, that's typically human resources type activity where there might be training, policies and procedures, surveys, that sort of typical response. It'd be interesting to explore it yourself, your sort of view on that. And I think I know what the answer would be, that actually what we're trying to do there is, like, perhaps measure and adapt the software, the psychology, rather than actually giving people the understanding of what's available to them, which would then actually unlock that potential for people.
Yes, there's a lot of reverse engineering going on with an innocent, often invisible misunderstanding of how the nature of the system works. So what a lot of organizations do is they try to embed behaviors, and they do that through psychological methods. So they sort of suggest prescriptions for how you should behave in certain ways, or it may not even behavioural, it might be attitudinal prescriptions saying, well, here's the attitude, be authentic or be curious or whatever. So if it's not a behavioural prescription, it's an attitudinal prescription. And that's fine if you remember to do it and you're able to access that thought in that moment, which we're not always, right? By definition. Or they equip people with kind of psychometrics and evaluations and feedback mechanisms where they give people, well, this is your style, that you know, you're going to be like this, you're going to be like this. And when you work with someone like that, you might do that, you know, the MBTIs and the discs and all sorts of, you know, and they're kind of interesting. But again, they're at the level of self, right? That they're at the level of what's presenting itself on the screen of perception, and it's not what we truly are. There's something before that. So they're too downstream. And what we're pointing to with quality of mind is more upstream. And then once you look at it at that level, all those attitudes and behaviors that you kind of want just sort of come online. So it comes back to what Amy Edmondson was saying, you know, well, she's pointing to humility, curiosity, and empathy. Now, if you sent someone on a training course to get humility, curiosity, and empathy from a behavioral perspective or an attitudinal perspective, you'd be giving people tools and techniques and kind of, you know, and that's nice to know, but it's not really shifting it for you, because either you'll be able to access that or you won't, right? Now, when we understand that at our true nature, those things are just innate: humility, curiosity, empathy, you know, in what we are. In an open aperture, high quality of mind, you tend to be more curious. You know, you're more interested in people. Your ego is not playing, right? And that doesn't come from applying any tool or technique. It's a subtractive approach where you just go, oh, at my very essence, I am those things, right? When I'm in a higher, because everyone's had experiences in teams, haven't they? Where that flow state we're talking about, it's just been there. It's been the best project ever, and it's really worked. And you've had times when it's been the opposite, right? So it's not like you have to be taught how to be humble, curious, and have empathy, right? That is innate. And a bit of, you know, what you might even call it common sense, right? So why don't we? Well, because we get triggered through our conditioning, through the psychological alertness that organizations set up, and because we self-identify with the pressure going, well, if I fail on this project, then I won't get promoted, because our ego is seeking, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So most interventions are aiming in the wrong place, innocently aiming in the wrong place. And Yeah, and that's my view. As you said, you probably guess what I'd say. But I'm now interested to know that, Nigel. So, given that you see the relevance and importance of this, the potential game-changing nature, when you, with your new venture now, which is helping organizations deliver technology transformation and things, it sounds like what you're going to be doing is including in that mandate for how you do change and more of an understanding of the mind and people than most of the industry does at the moment. Is that sort of what you're looking to do? You're looking to incorporate that in as a key variable or a key factor?
Yeah, very much so. Because I think, it's fascinating that just the sheer amount of effort and investment that's going into tech at the minute, and the fact that actually, people are starting to talk this under the guise of psychological safety, that actually it's how we work and feel about the world that has a big impact on this, and where, some of this understanding can make a pretty big difference, really. And I think how we apply this understanding could be a real eye opener, I think, for organizations in terms of, how do we get to where we want to? How do we get people to accept change? How do we adopt a more agile mindset? How do we access what we want to in terms of, high performing teams?
And because it sounds like there's a couple of elements here. I mean, the one is you mentioned there's a scarcity of tech talent.
Absolutely.
So there's on the people doing the tech, if you want to call it that. How do you get more out of them so that they're more productive? How do you keep the great ones so that they don't get headhunted by lots of money somewhere else? So there's the tech talent side. And there's also about when implementing tech in an organization, how you allow the users or the people who are going to be benefited from that tech to actually see the new way of working in it, not just be, oh, there's that new thing that they want us to do.
Yeah, predominantly in, the challenge around the scarcity of tech talent and getting tech delivered effectively, making high performing teams. With a recognition, of course, that, you need to adopt that change in the organizations. And so, this understanding is helpful in that regard as well. And the digital transformation, it's much bandied about term and much probably overloaded term in terms of it means different organizations. But it's not a tech project, it's a change project that impacts the whole organization. So I think it's important to recognize that. And, any change succeeds or fails based on the people and their outlook on that change, and how that, there's a lot of perception, it's changing. How does that impact me, my job? And the self kicks in a lot. People get a lot of kind of low quality mind around change typically.
Yeah, they do. And there's even, that's even normalized. I mean, there's the Kubler-Ross change curve. I know that gets used in organizations, which was,
it's like, you will feel bad about change.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I kind of like, I'm very curious about why people think that's a good idea, because to me, change is quite simple at one level. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's quite simple. I mean, change comes from people having realizations, right? And by realization, we mean when one set of thinking dissolves and a new one arises, or one set of perceptions dissolve and a new one arises. So if you want what we call behind the eye change, people to see the obviousness of what needs to happen in an organization, probably via tech, given nowadays, right? Then they need to have their own seeing of that, their own recognition and realization around the need for this change, which is going to future-proof their organization.
Yeah.
If not, then you're dragging them through the change curve, kicking and screaming and kind of, because, and that's just because they haven't had the realization of the obviousness of the change. And sometimes people tend to kind of fix that with some employee engagement, or employee, comms, which, again, it may or may not work, but it's not pointing in the right place. It's not upstream enough. So I think you're right. There's no such thing as a tech project. It's a change project that happens to use tech.
Yes.
If the project starts in IT, just to be generalizing, as we're putting some new tech in. No, you're not. There's human beings that are going to be involved in that. So what would you say there? I realize it can be generalized, but with the tech talent that's out there, obviously they need some real skills and expertise in the tech side, but how much is their ability to understand what we're sort of pointing to in the role of the human and the mind in their ability to deliver great change? How much of that do they, if I'm generalizing, does the tech talent get? Or do they just think, well, actually, all I'm about is how well I can code or whatever it is?
Yeah, it's very much in an emergent state, really. A lot of this thinking. There are some organisations, as you would say, the places like a Google who are very attuned to this, having done their own research on it. But I think the traditional thinking, and probably still the pervasive thinking overall in the industry, is like, yeah, in terms of delivering tech projects, it's about tech talent and the depth of understanding or expertise around particular technology skills, and then how you organize the work through agile delivery methods. Actually, the human factors, aside from when you get into more sort of deeper organizational change in an organization, the human factors around tech delivery don't really get the sort of, I think it's the biggest lever you can pull, right? You've got the tech expertise, the agile methods, and then the human factors and understanding of quality of mind. I think that's probably the biggest lever on productivity, and yet it's the one that's underrepresented, I feel, at the moment.
Well, that's interesting. I'll just summarize that because I think that's a really neat way of putting it. It sounds like what you're saying is there's three elements they need. They need the technical skills to be able to do the tech, whatever that might be. They need to understand the process or of something like agile, so how they're all going to work together in the process.
Yeah.
And they need to have an understanding of something like quality of mind. Now, what you're saying is, of those three, actually the quality of mind one's probably the most important, but it's the least valued and sort of recognized one.
Least talked about, represented, recognized. Some elements of coaching and development gets towards this, but as I mentioned before, a lot of the kind of coaching in the tech space tends to be agile coaching, tends to unfortunately often veer towards method rather than minds.
Yes, so that's the second box we're talking to. So it might train them nicely on a method.
Yeah,
won't understand the mind element to do with that. Yeah. And I suppose if there's a scarcity of talent, one can argue they can get away without having all of those three, because if it was a really competitive market, they'd have to get good on all three. But if there's a scarcity of talent, it might be, well, yeah, you can code, you can come along kind of thing.
Yeah, which is interesting that there's that perspective. Of course, the reverse perspective is, if there is a scarcity of talent, why aren't we trying to unlock the full potential of that talent?
Well, exactly. So that you can get more out of each.
Because the current, absolutely, and the current sort of industry response around the shortage of tech talent is to, well, one, prices have gone up massively in the market. That's how markets function, right? Second is looking at new and novel ways of getting talent to the sector, which again is great and very worthy in terms of people returning to work, cross-training people from different sectors, bringing people in from different backgrounds. So that's great in terms of improving the diversity of the industry and trying to get people into tech that wouldn't have considered a career in tech before, to address the shortage. But to me, if there is a shortage, surely we should be looking at unlocking the full potential of the people that we have. And if this thing, psychological safety, actually quality of mind, it has a big impact on that, we should be talking about that a lot more than we are. Probably.
Yeah. And so to me, that's an absolute no-brainer, obvious thing to do, right? But I am biased. I will hold my bias a bit. So I'm curious to know, when you've been talking to potential clients and the market about this, and I realize it's a little bit early days where you are at the moment, but what's their sort of view? Are they seeing it? Are they like, yeah, I think you're onto something here, Nigel? Where are they at? Are they ready for this obviousness?
Really a mix, Piers. Really is a mix in that, there's more resources now out there and more people sort of in the industry talking about this, more books, including this in mainstream sort of, this is how you do digital transformation. Actually, the human factor, psychological safety is part of that. So there's a growing awareness, but I wouldn't say it was necessarily mainstream in the way that, we talk about agile and other things in the industry.
You see, this is something I just observed. So and I'm just going to widen it out now to say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, mental health wasn't really talked about in organizations at all, or mental wellness. No. And it has got a lot more popular in the last 5-10 years, which at one level is great, brilliant. And psychological safety, I'd say, is part of that.
Yeah.
The challenge I see is that as that's become more popular, their way of seeing it, which in my mind is the wrong paradigm, is also got more popular. So they're diagnosing this issue but their solution is not the right solution for the reasons we talked about earlier. It's too downstream. It's not really understanding the nature of the mind. It slightly self perpetuates the problem. So I suppose great that there's more recognition and awareness that there's a human aspect to this, but it'd be great also, even double great, if they actually realize the solution is not necessarily to just, go more downstream into more processes and sort of tools and techniques, and actually understand something very profound and yet practical about the nature of the mind.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where I see it as a real opportunity to not go down the wrong route again.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it is fascinating. I think, we're not there yet.
I love the fact that you're pioneering this, and I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I am who I am with my unique set of experiences and career journey and personal journey. And for me, the next chapter, how do I bring those things together? And as you say, it was almost an obviousness. It's like, well, how has this happened that things I've been exploring personally and professionally seem to come together at a moment in time in the industry when this is called for, and there's a growing awareness of the need for this sort of thinking in the sector. So, call it the stars aligning or what you will. It became very obvious to me that this is something it's very, very contemporary in terms of what's happening in the industry. As you say, growing awareness of factors like mental well-being, but actually the shortage of tech talent, the impact of psychological safety on performance. It has to be the thing that we're looking at and addressing.
Yeah. So it's absolutely paramount in the way and crucial to organizational change. And there's some statistic, isn't it? You might know more than me about how many change programs deliver on time and on budget and on quality. And it's something like, was it 88% don't or something? It's some huge.
Yeah. I mean, there are, change is hard, right? And it's hard because it's a human endeavor with lots of different individuals involved.
Yeah. So you've got lots of moving pieces. You've got lots of human beings. The tech's almost like by the by, because it is interesting in the way people, and you'll know more than me, procure tech, and the way then that the supplier tries to help hinder that. It looks very complicated in the way that they package up the tech solution, and it seems to quite quickly be possible to get people's backs up when they feel that the tech provider's overcharging them, or they change the scope, or the scope creep, and it just seems to push people more into a lower aperture. The way the tech is procured, I don't know whether we want to go into that, but it's just a thought that I've seen in organizations.
Yeah, and then you're right. And I think actually the way tech is procured has changed while I've been in the industry, but it brings with it other challenges. So certainly the challenge that you described still exists, where, an organization has bought a complex solution, and it's just like, but of course you can't pin down exactly what a complex technology solution is going to do in advance. Hence people moving to more agile thinking. I think as we've moved as an industry towards fully embracing agile, there's been quite a fundamental shift in organization buying a tech solution to buying capacity and expertise, so capability that they don't have in their organization, capacity they don't have in their organization to deliver tech change from suppliers. That brings with itself its own challenges, which makes this conversation even more relevant, because it's not about going to a third-party supplier and say, we'll give you £1 million to build this software system for us, thank you very much. It's, we've got these gaps in our organization, we'd like you to give us these types of individuals or these types of teams and embed those in our organization. So you've then got not just all the normal day-to-day challenges of working in tech on delivering complex pieces of work, but actually you've got often multiple suppliers and their own individual people, unique cultures embedding into a client's organization to deliver that change.
Yes. So in the way that they need to embed that talent and capacity and competency into the organization, that you've got lots of different stakeholders, cultures merging, all coming together. and not everyone, and maybe silos, as opposed to it being a totally sort of outsourced solution that, is done to you. Yeah. So that it brings a complexity in terms of people understanding what's going on. And I suppose there's also in tech, there's an element of some people won't know the technology piece, and then they feel a bit threatened because they don't know whether, because it's, there might be some things that are beyond them in a sort of technical perspective. So does that mean they then get more concerned because they don't really know whether that particular change is needed or isn't needed, or, because only the tech people know the tech. So does that create more anxiety for people who are literally, the sponsors of the program?
Yeah. And often the challenge can be that relationship between, the technology teams, stakeholders in the organization. And then of course, how the end user needs, if you're building a new digital service for an organization, how the tech teams then get the representation of the end user needs transferred into the program as well. So yeah, lots of complex interrelationships and communications and opportunities for inefficiencies and
So
challenges.
it reminds me of, sometimes I just play with the words for people. So, you've got change is definitely complex, but does it have to feel complicated? Right? That's a quality of mind difference. Yes, we're overloaded and it's complex, to I'm overwhelmed and it's all really complicated.
Yeah.
And I'm at risk. My career's at risk if this doesn't go well. And I think when people start attaching their career or their next career move to what's going on, they're very invested in their own survival in the organization or ego or whatever.
Yeah.
And then they start making odd decisions. So yeah, there's a lot there. So Nigel, if we were going to summarize this, so Nigel, what I'm hearing is that for all your decades of experience in tech and change, you've seen that one of the key factors that needs to be considered isn't just people's technical abilities, isn't just their understanding of something like agile, but also their understanding of how to create higher quality of mind, or you might say more psychological safety. And you've seen that's kind of missing from both on the people adopting the change and particularly from the people who are doing the change in terms of the tech talent. And what you're looking to do is to bring your understanding of quality of mind and your huge experience in how tech change works to enables them to get change in a quicker, easier, more cost-effective way by making the quality of mind or the psychological safety elements more paramount and more kind of respected and recognized.
Yeah, absolutely, Piers. I think there's a lot of very mature work and thinking around technology capabilities and agile methods. What it seems to me isn't as well represented yet are those human factors that actually I think have a potential to have a big impact on how we technology deliver change into organizations. And that's the thing that I'd like to address and focus more energy on and help clients to understand and benefit from.
And if there's an organization listening going, oh yeah, we know that. Yeah, we know it's important to do the human elements, but they're doing it in the way that you and I would describe as downstream through process and sort of training and things. What would you say to them that they're missing, even though they think they kind of realize the human elements are important?
I think it would be a case of, considering developing this understanding and thinking a little bit more holistically about the mind and the impact that has on people in the work, and potentially exploring this understanding. We could talk about some of the factors around psychological safety. One of those is curiosity. And I would suggest to people to embrace that curiosity and to explore with an open mind, perhaps, some of this work and this understanding, because I think that might potentially unlock some new avenues of thinking for them.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I imagine people are quite curious about new forms of tech because they know it's an emerging field. Do they know the understanding of the mind is also an emerging field?
Yes. Yeah. And something which is our understanding is constantly evolving. And as we find, better ways of delivering software, we're also finding new understandings of how the mind works.
So if someone's listening to this and is a little bit curious, and let's say they're about to, or they're in the middle of, or about to do some change in their organization, what would you recommend they do, Nigel? What would you urge them to consider?
Probably look at some of the more of the work that you and I have done, Piers, and reach out for a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's invite listeners. If you're interested in understanding more about quality of mind, or more about particularly about how quality of mind intersects with tech and change, psychological safety, do reach out. This podcast is only meant to give you just a little hint, a gist, a taste to make this relevant for your scenario. That's going to be via a one-to-one conversation or something like that. So, Nigel, I think what you're going to be doing is going to be a roaring success, because the need is so huge. I can't see how it can't be, really. I wish you all the best with it. So it's wonderful.
Thank you, Piers. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Well, thank you. And listeners, as always, have fun being curious, and we'll catch you on the next one.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and want to know more, check out our website at qualityofmind.biz. And also feel free to reach out and leave us a review or a comment. Until next time, have fun being curious.